In the harsh, post-apocalyptic wasteland of the Drifter Vol.3, survival has become a brutal contest where no shelter is guaranteed and no mercy is given. Alone and hardened by past betrayals, the drifter roams a desolate landscape where every shadow conceals danger and every encounter tests his resolve. With lawless factions vying for control and the ruins of civilization offering little refuge, he must navigate a treacherous world that demands ruthless choices. In a journey marked by isolation, relentless pursuit, and the constant threat of annihilation, he faces the ultimate question: can one man survive when compassion has been all but extinguished? The makeshift shelter crumbled as the acid rain dissolved. Its tattered canvas roof. Alone in the dark, the drifter watched as the last physical reminder of a world long gone melted away. His weathered hands, scarred from 1,000 fights for survival, trembled, not from fear, but from the weight of memory. 3 years, he whispered to the howling wind. 3 years since I buried hope alongside the others. A distant explosion illuminated the horizon, followed by screams that carried across the wasteland. The warring factions were closing in. There would be no rest tonight. There never was. The drifter adjusted his makeshift respirator and gathered what little remained of his supplies. The journey continued. It always did. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. The sun struggled to pierce the perpetual haze that had become Earth's new atmosphere. Particles of ash and chemical residue hung suspended in the air, turning daylight into a muted, sickly amber glow. The drifter moved through this half-light like a spectre, his outline blurred by the layers of weathered clothing and tactical gear that had become his second skin. Reed Mason, that had been his name once, in a world of clean water and electric lights. Now he was simply the drifter, a designation earned through years of constant movement. Names belonged to the old world, to communities and connections. In this new reality, such attachments were luxuries few could afford, and fewer still survived. Uncracked asphalt beneath his boots told stories of a civilization erased. Highway 16 had once been an artery connecting the heartland to the coast. Now it was a graveyard of abandoned vehicles, their metal frames twisted and rusted, scavenged for anything of value years ago. The drifter moved between these mechanical corpses with practiced caution, his hand never straying far from the modified shotgun holstered at his side. His possessions were few but crucial: a backpack containing water purification tablets, ammunition, medical supplies, a solar charger, and a dog-eared journal filled with maps and notes. Around his neck hung a tarnished compass that no longer pointed true north but helped him navigate by landmarks. The radiation had disrupted Earth's magnetic field, rendering traditional navigation tools unreliable. The wasteland had its own geography. Now, territories marked not by state lines, but by the reach of various factions. To the east lay the domain of the engineers, survivors who had converted an old manufacturing facility into a fortress where they developed weapons and technology, trading them to other groups for resources. Their pragmatism made them dangerous. They valued efficiency above all else and would eliminate any perceived threat without hesitation. To the west roamed the Sanctuary, a quasi-religious group that believed the apocalypse had been divine punishment. They offered salvation to those who joined their ranks, but hunted down unbelievers with zealous cruelty. Their scouts, recognizable by their white armbands and ritualistic face markings, were known to patrol these roads. The north belonged to the Reclaimers, former military personnel who believed in restoring order through force. They'd established outposts throughout their territory, creating a semblance of security for those under their protection, at the cost of absolute obedience. And scattered throughout were the independent settlements, fragile communities of survivors who had carved out precarious existences in the ruins. always at risk from raids, disease, or the increasingly violent weather patterns that plagued the New World. The Drifter belonged to none of them. He had learned the hard way that allegiances were temporary and betrayal inevitable. 2 years ago, he had made the mistake of joining a settlement called Haven. For 6 months, he had allowed himself to believe in the possibility of rebuilding, of finding community again. Then came the night when the sanctuary attacked, and he discovered that Haven's leader had struck a deal, offering up newcomers like the Drifter as sacrifices to protect the original settlers. He had escaped by mere chance, awakening to the sound of screams minutes before they came for him. In the chaos, he had fled with nothing but the clothes on his back and the bitter lesson that trust was a liability in this new world. Since then, he had survived through careful observation and strategic movement. He traded information and occasionally his skills as a scout or guard, but never stayed in one place long enough to form connections. The journal in his pack contained his most valuable asset, a mental map of the wasteland, safe routes, water, sources, danger zones, and the shifting territories of the major factions. The distant howl of engines broke the afternoon stillness. The Drifter froze, his senses immediately alert. The sound came from the west, multiple vehicles moving fast, raiders most likely, or perhaps a sanctuary hunting party. Either way, they represented a threat best avoided. He quickly surveyed his surroundings. The highway stretched before him, exposed and vulnerable. To his right lay the ruins of what had once been a suburban neighborhood, now a maze of collapsed homes and overgrown yards. To his left, a dense forest had reclaimed the land, trees twisted and mutated by the chemical rain, but offering concealment. The Drifter chose the forest, moving with practiced efficiency. He traveled light for this reason, to be able to change course. At a moment's notice, as he disappeared into the tree line, the engines grew louder. He crouched behind the gnarled trunk of a once oak tree, its bark bearing the scars of acid precipitation, and watched. 5 motorcycles roared past, followed by a modified pickup truck. The riders wore mismatched armor cobbled together from sports equipment and industrial materials. Raiders, as he had suspected, identifiable by the red markings spray-painted across their makeshift armor. They were heading east, likely toward one of the smaller settlements in that direction. The Drifter considered sending a warning, but dismissed the thought almost immediately. Intervention meant involvement, and involvement meant risk. Once the convoy had passed, he continued through the forest, adjusting his course northeast. He had heard rumors of an underground market operating in the ruins of Lancaster, a place where someone with his knowledge could barter for supplies without too many questions. It was a 3-day journey on foot, but safer than the alternatives. As dusk approached, the Drifter sought shelter for the night. The forest had thinned, giving way to an area that had once been farmland. In the distance, he spotted the silhouette of a barn, its structure still largely intact. Approaching with caution, he circled the building twice, checking for signs of recent occupation or traps. Finding none, he slipped inside through a gap in the wooden slats. The interior was dusty but dry. Previous visitors had left evidence of temporary stays. A fire pit dug into the dirt floor, makeshift sleeping areas in the hayloft, but nothing recent. The Drifter set up a rudimentary alarm system using discarded cans strung together with wire at the entrances, then climbed to the loft to establish his camp for the night. As he arranged his bedroll, his hands brushed against the inner pocket of his jacket, feeling the outline of the photograph he carried, the only personal item he had kept from before. He resisted the urge to look at it. Some memories were best left undisturbed, especially at night when the darkness made it harder to push them away again. Instead, he took out his journal and, by the light of a carefully shielded LED flashlight, updated his maps with the raider sighting, and made notes about the condition of the highway and surrounding area. Information was currency in the wasteland. sometimes more valuable than ammunition or medicine. The night passed in cycles of light sleep and watchful wakefulness. Years of survival had trained the drifter to rest without fully lowering his guard, to wake at the slightest disturbance. By dawn, he was already packing his meager belongings, preparing to continue his journey. A sound from below froze him mid-motion, the scrape of feet against dirt, too deliberate to be an animal. Someone had entered the barn, disabling his alarm system with enough skill to prevent it from triggering. The drifter silently drew his sidearm, a 9mm handgun with a homemade silencer attached. Bullets were precious, but his life more so. "I know you're up there," a woman's voice called softly. "I'm not looking for trouble, just shelter for a few hours." The drifter remained silent, calculating his options. The hayloft had no rear exit. If this was a trap, he would be cornered. "I'm alone," the voice continued. "Raiders hit my group 2 days ago on the old interstate. I'm the only one who made it out." Still, the drifter did not respond. Survivor stories were common currency in the wasteland, designed to lower guards and evoke sympathy. He had used similar tactics himself when necessary. "Fine," the woman sighed. "Stay silent, but I'm coming up. Shoot me if you want, but I haven't slept in 48 hours, and I don't much care at this point." Footsteps approached the ladder leading to the loft. The drifter aimed his weapon at the opening, finger tensed on the trigger. A head appeared, dark hair matted with dust and what might have been dried blood, a face gaunt with exhaustion, but eyes alert despite the claimed fatigue. The woman assessed him with a quick glance, noting the aimed weapon without surprise. "If you were going to shoot, you'd have done it already," she observed, pulling herself into the loft with practiced movements that spoke of military training. Now, fully visible, she presented a contrast to most wasteland travelers. Her clothing was worn, but of quality make. Tactical pants with multiple pockets, a weather-resistant jacket, and boots that looked relatively new. More tellingly, she carried a modified AR-15 slung across her back, the kind of weapon that wasn't easily scavenged or traded for. "Reclaimer?" the drifter asked, breaking his silence, but keeping his weapon trained on her. A bitter smile crossed her face. "Former. Name's Vega. They'll be looking for me, which means they'll find you too if I stay. Long, but I need a few hours. Then I'll be gone, and your conscience can rest easy knowing you didn't shoot an exhausted woman in cold blood." The drifter lowered his weapon slightly, but not completely. "No one said anything about conscience. This isn't about morality. It's about threat assessment." Vega nodded, unsurprised by his pragmatism. "Fair enough. Assess away, but do it while I sleep." Without waiting for permission, she moved to the far corner of the loft, positioning herself with her back to the wall and clear sight lines to both the ladder and the drifter. She placed her rifle within reach, but made no threatening moves. 3 hours, the drifter said finally. "Then we both leave, different directions." "Wouldn't have it any other way," Vega replied, already closing her eyes. The drifter watched as her breathing slowed, noting how even in sleep she maintained a state of readiness, one hand near her weapon. Whatever her story was, desertion from the reclaimers or something else, she was clearly someone accustomed to danger. That made her unpredictable, and unpredictable meant dangerous. Yet as the morning progressed, he found himself studying her with reluctant curiosity. The reclaimers were not a group-own left voluntarily. Their code was clear: service for life, desertion punishable by death. If she had truly left their ranks, she was either remarkably brave or remarkably foolish. Perhaps both. 3 hours passed. The drifter had used the time to reorganize his pack and clean his weapons, all while keeping Vega in his peripheral vision. When the agreed time elapsed, he cleared his throat loudly. Her eyes opened immediately, alert despite the brief rest. "Time's up?" "Yes." Vega stretched and gathered her belongings with efficient movements. "Which way are you headed? Does it matter?" "It might. Reclaimer patrols have increased along the eastern routes. They're searching for something." She shouldered her pack. "Or someone." The Drifter processed this information, comparing it against its own knowledge of the area. Lancaster is east. Bad time to visit, Vega replied, unless you enjoy reclaimer hospitality. A moment of calculation, then decision. What did you take from them? Vega's expression hardened. What makes you think I took anything? They don't send patrols for deserters, not multiple ones. One execution squad would suffice for that. They're looking for something important. Their eyes met in a moment of mutual assessment. Finally, Vega reached into her jacket and withdrew a small metal object, a data drive encased in military-grade protective housing. Insurance policy, she said simply, in case they find me before I reach my destination, which is west. There's a group there who can use this information. She studied him carefully. You know these territories. Your pack has maps. I've seen you checking them. The Drifter narrowed his eyes. You were watching me before you entered the barn. Caution keeps you alive, something we seem to share. Vega replaced the drive in her jacket. I could use a guide, someone who knows how to avoid the patrols. Not interested in suicide missions, but you are interested in survival. Whatever's happening with the Reclaimers will affect everyone in the wasteland. Their patrols are just the beginning. The Drifter considered her words. The increase in Reclaimer activity disturbed the careful balance between the factions. Disruption meant danger, but also opportunity for those with the right information. Lancaster first, he said finally. I need supplies. Then I'll consider your proposal. Vega nodded, accepting the compromise. We travel separately, meet at the old clock tower at the town center by sundown tomorrow. If you're followed, I won't be. The Drifter gave a single nod of acknowledgement. They descended from the loft in silence, and at the barn door they parted without another word, the Drifter heading northeast through the cover of the tree line. Vega disappearing southwest into the tall grass of the former farmland. As he moved through the forest, the Drifter questioned his decision. Involvement with a Reclaimer deserter carried exceptional risk, yet the potential intelligence value was significant. The wasteland survived on information as much as resources, and major faction movements affected everyone. He adjusted his course, taking a longer route to Lancaster that would provide better cover. The encounter with Vega had disrupted his carefully maintained isolation. Whether that disruption would prove fatal or advantageous remained to be seen. The wasteland offered no guarantees, only consequences, and the Drifter had survived this long by anticipating those consequences before they arrived. Lancaster rose from the wasteland like the skeleton of a forgotten beast. Once a thriving suburban community, now its hollowed-out buildings stood as monuments to a civilization erased. The Drifter approached from the northwest, using the remnants of a drainage canal for cover. Evening shadows stretched across the ruined landscape, providing additional concealment as he surveyed the town's perimeter. Something was wrong. The underground market that operated here maintained lookouts at all major entry points, a necessary precaution in the wasteland. Today, those posts stood empty. The Drifter crouched behind a collapsed section of concrete, his instincts screaming caution. Through his binoculars, he scanned the town center, focusing on the clock tower where he was supposed to meet Vega. The structure remained intact, its hands forever frozen at 3:47, the moment when the electromagnetic pulse had swept across the region. Movement caught his eye, a flash of light reflecting off metal near the base of the tower. He adjusted his focus. A Reclaimer patrol, identifiable by their uniform tactical gear and the distinctive red stripe on their helmets, was establishing a perimeter around the central square. An ambush. Whether they had tracked Vega or anticipated her movements, the result was the same. Lancaster had become a trap. The Drifter eased back from his position. The rational choice was clear. Retreat, abandon the meeting, continue alone, Ash always had. Vega's problems were her own, her fate not his concern. Yet he hesitated, calculating. The Reclaimer's presence in such numbers confirmed the importance. of whatever information Vega carried, information that could potentially shift the balance of power throughout the wasteland. Information was survival. A sudden burst of gunfire erupted from the eastern section of town, followed by the distinctive sound of concussion grenades. The reclaimers at the tower immediately tensed, several breaking formation to move toward the disturbance. A diversion, the Drifter realized. Vega was creating an opening. Decision crystallized into action. The Drifter moved swiftly along the canal until he reached a partially collapsed service tunnel. Local scavengers used these passages to transport goods to the market, avoiding the exposed streets above. If the reclaimers had done their research, they would be watching these entrances. As well, the tunnel air hung thick with mildew and decay. The Drifter activated his night vision goggles, one of his most valuable possessions, scavenged from a military bunker years ago and carefully maintained since. The green-tinted world revealed a path relatively clear of obstacles, though water had pooled in several sections. He moved quickly but cautiously, aware that sound carried in these enclosed spaces. The gunfire above had diminished to sporadic exchanges, suggesting either the diversion had played out or Vega had been captured or killed. Either possibility simplified his immediate objectives: reach the clock tower, assess the situation, then extract with minimal engagement. A splash ahead stopped him mid-stride. Not the natural drip of water, but the deliberate step of something or someone moving through the flooded section of tunnel ahead. The Drifter silently drew his sidearm, thumbing off the safety. "Identify yourself," came a harsh whisper from the darkness. The voice wasn't Vega's, nor did it carry the clipped precision of reclaimer communication. The Drifter remained silent, calculating angles and distances. "Last chance," the voice warned. "Identify or I fire." "Mark it regular," the Drifter replied, using the coded language of Lancaster's underground economy. "Looking for trade, not trouble." A pause, then. "Market's closed, permanently. Reclaimers hit it this morning. Anyone who survived scattered." The information landed like a physical blow. The underground market had been one of the few reliable constants in the wasteland, operating continuously for over 2 years. Its loss would disrupt supply lines throughout the region, affecting even isolated travelers like himself. "Who am I speaking to?" the Drifter asked. "Someone who needs to keep moving." "Same as you, I expect." The voice had an edge of pain to it, the words slightly strained. "There's a reclaimer checkpoint at the north exit of this tunnel. 4 guards, heavy weapons. South exit leads to the old parking structure. It's clear for now, but they're sweeping that direction." Strategic information freely given. Unusual in the wasteland where everything had a price. It suggested either a trap or a shared enemy. "You're injured," the Drifter observed. A bitter laugh echoed softly. "Astute. Reclaimer rounds don't believe in flesh wounds. I'll be dead before dawn, but I'd prefer not to die in this sewer." A wet cough punctuated the statement. "You heading for the clock tower?" The Drifter tensed. "Why ask?" "Because there's a woman there causing all kinds of hell for the reclaimers. Thought you might be with her." Vega had reached their meeting point despite the ambush, either impressively skilled or recklessly determined. Possibly both. "How do I get there without joining you in death?" the Drifter asked pragmatically. "Service ladder 3 junctions ahead. Leads to the back of what used to be a bank. 2nd floor has a broken window overlooking the square. Good sightlines to the tower." Another cough, wetter than before. "Might find something useful in my pack. Password is redemption." The Drifter understood the implication. The dying man was offering his resources. A final transaction. "Your name?" the Drifter asked. "Does it matter?" "No," the Drifter conceded, "but I'll remember it anyway." A wheeze. That might have been a laugh. "Garrett, remember that I died dry, if nothing else." The Drifter moved forward, finally able to make out the slumped figure against the tunnel wall. Garrett wore the patchwork gear of a career scavenger, multiple. Pockets, reinforced joints, specialized tools hanging from various loops, and carabiners. A pool of dark liquid spread beneath him, visible even in the green-tinted vision of the goggles. Beside him lay a heavy backpack, secured with both a combination lock and what appeared to be a fingerprint scanner. Serious security for the wasteland. Garrett gestured weakly toward it. Market paid me to transport their records when things went south. Insurance policy. Never made the rendezvous. His breathing had become shallow. Your turn to carry it now. Right place, right time. Funny how that works. The drifter knelt and examined the pack without touching it. Any tracking devices? Paranoid bastard, aren't you? Garrett's voice had dropped to a whisper. No trackers, just information that people will kill for. The distant sound of boots sloshing through water echoed from the north end of the tunnel. Reclaimer patrol, moving methodically their way. They're coming, the drifter warned. Garrett nodded weakly. Password is redemption. Remember, and he fumbled at his belt, extracting a grenade. I'll buy you time. Understanding passed between them, the final act of a dying man. The drifter took the pack. I won't waste it, he promised. See that you don't. Garrett's blood-stained teeth showed in what might have been a smile. Now go. I want privacy for this last dance. The drifter moved swiftly down the tunnel, counting junctions as he went. Behind him, Garrett's voice rose in a ragged song, an old military cadence, deliberately loud, drawing attention to himself and away from the fleeing figure. At the third junction, the drifter found the service ladder, its metal rungs corroded but intact. He slung Garrett's pack across his shoulders alongside his own and began to climb, the added weight making each rung a test of strength. As he raked the halfway point, a muffled explosion shook the tunnel below, followed by shouts and the rattle of automatic weapons fire. Garrett had kept his word. The ladder led to a maintenance hatch that opened into what had once been a bank vault, now emptied of everything except dust and detritus. The drifter moved through the abandoned building until he reached the second floor, finding the broken window exactly as Garrett had described. From this vantage point, he had a clear view of the square and the clock tower. The scene below was chaos. The reclaimers had established a perimeter around the tower, but it was clearly compromised. 3 of their armored vehicles burned, creating a smokescreen that complicated their operations. Gunfire erupted sporadically from multiple directions, suggesting either a larger resistance force or highly effective guerrilla tactics. Through his binoculars, the drifter spotted Vega. She had positioned herself on the clock tower's maintenance platform, approximately 30 feet up. From there, she had clear shots at any reclaimers attempting to approach the base of the structure. 3 bodies already lay around the tower's foundation, testament to her marksmanship, but it was a temporary advantage at best. The drifter counted at least 15 reclaimers still active in the square, with communications suggesting reinforcements. Approaching, Vega was trapped, her position defensible, but ultimately unsustainable. Without intervention, her execution was merely a matter of time. The drifter faced a choice that would define his path forward, maintain his isolation and escape with Garrett's mysterious pack, or risk everything to extract someone who carried information that could reshape the wasteland's power structure. In the world before, such decisions might have hinged on morality or connection. In the wasteland, they came down to calculated risk and potential reward. The drifter checked his weapons, secured both packs, and began plotting a route to the clock tower. The wasteland had taught him that survival often meant making impossible choices. Today, he was choosing to survive together rather than die alone. The sun was setting, painting the ruins of Lancaster in shades of blood and rust. The drifter moved through the abandoned buildings with methodical precision, advancing toward the clock tower in carefully timed bursts between reclaimer patrol patterns. Years of survival had taught him to read tactical situations, to identify weaknesses, informations, and exploit momentary lapses in attention. The reclaimers were disciplined but predictable. Their military background manifested in standardized protocols that privileged efficiency over adaptability. They maintained radio contact at 60-second intervals and rotated their perimeter guards every 15 minutes. Each shift change created a 5-second window of vulnerability, barely enough time to cross an exposed section, but sufficient for someone who had mastered the art of invisible movement. From his current position in a half-collapsed department store, the Drifter had clear sightlines to the clock tower. Vega remained on the maintenance platform, conserving ammunition by firing only when reclaimers attempted to advance. Her situation had deteriorated. A crimson stain spread across her left shoulder, suggesting at least one enemy round had found its mark. Without medical attention, her combat effectiveness would rapidly decline. The Drifter accessed Garrett's pack, entering redemption into the combination lock. The fingerprint scanner posed a more significant challenge, but a careful examination revealed a manual override, a small port designed for emergency access. Using a multi-tool from his own supplies, the Drifter bypassed the biometric security. The pack's contents were unexpected. A ruggedized tablet computer, several sealed data drives, and a compact satellite communication device, technology far beyond the typical wasteland scavenger's inventory. The market's insurance policy was evidently more than transaction records. Whatever information it contained had been valuable enough to warrant the Reclaimer's decisive strike against Lancaster. The tablet powered on immediately, its battery at full charge. A password prompt appeared on the screen. The Drifter hesitated, then entered redemption again. Access granted. The screen displayed a map of the surrounding region with multiple locations marked: settlements, resource caches, patrol routes. But most importantly, it showed Reclaimer positions in real time, including the approaching reinforcements Vega had mentioned. They had less than 20 minutes before the situation became non-survivable. The Drifter quickly assessed his options. Direct engagement was suicide, given the enemy numbers. Stealth extraction would require creating a diversion significant enough to draw attention away from the tower. He examined the map again, focusing on the infrastructure surrounding the square. An opportunity presented itself. The old municipal building adjacent to the square housed the emergency generators that had once powered Lancaster during outages. If the fuel tanks remained, they could provide the distraction needed. The Drifter calculated the risks. Moving to the municipal building meant navigating away from his objective before approaching it again. Precious minutes when Vega's condition was deteriorating. But attempting to reach her without neutralizing the Reclaimer presence first would likely result in both their deaths. Decision made, he packed the tablet and moved toward the rear of the department store, using a service corridor that connected to the municipal building's basement. The passage was partially collapsed, requiring him to squeeze through gaps barely wide enough for his frame. The weight of the two packs made the journey arduous, but abandoning either was not an option. The municipal building's basement was flooded with 3 feet of stagnant water, forcing the Drifter to proceed with his lower half submerged. The water's chemical smell suggested contamination, another hazard in a growing list of threats. He activated his night vision again, revealing a maze of pipes and electrical conduits overhead, many ruptured and leaking their contents into the murky pool below. At the far end of the basement, a metal staircase led to the generator room. The doctor was locked, standard security for critical infrastructure. The Drifter extracted a set of picks from an inner pocket of his jacket and worked on the mechanism. Locks were becoming rare in the wasteland, their components salvaged for more practical applications. Those that remained were often seized from disuse, but this one yielded after 30 seconds of manipulation, evidence that someone had maintained it. The generator room contained 3 massive industrial units designed to power essential services during emergencies. 2 had been gutted for parts, but the third remained intact. its fuel tank indicator showing nearly half capacity. The Drifter examined the unit's control panel, finding it operational but secured with a physical key. Time was critical. Rather than attempting to hotwire the complex system, the Drifter opted for a more direct approach. From his pack, he withdrew a small incendiary device, one of 3 he carried for emergency situations. These were valuable commodities in the wasteland, not to be used lightly, but the current circumstances justified the expenditure. He placed the device against the fuel line connecting the tank to the generator, setting its timer for 5 minutes. Enough time to reach a secondary position with clear sightlines to both the generator building and the clock tower. Before leaving, he created a rudimentary circuit using wires from the gutted generators, ensuring that when the incendiary device detonated, it would trigger the generator's startup sequence. The resulting power surge through damaged systems would amplify the explosion significantly. Retreating through a different exit, the Drifter made his way to an apartment building overlooking the square. Every movement now had to be timed precisely against the reclaimer patrol patterns. A mistake would not only compromise his position but potentially alert them to the imminent explosion, negating its effectiveness as a diversion. He reached the 4th floor of the apartment building with 2 minutes remaining on the device's timer. From a window facing the square, he established visual contact with Vega and prepared to signal her. Using the reflection from his compass face, he directed a series of light flashes toward the maintenance platform, an old wasteland code, meaning prepare to move. Vega's posture shifted subtly, the only acknowledgement that she had received and understood the message. The Drifter positioned himself at the window, shotgun ready, waiting for the chaos that would follow. The explosion, when it came, exceeded expectations. The generator's fuel tank detonated with a force that shattered windows for several blocks. Secondary explosions followed as the power surge ignited residual gases in the municipal building's damaged systems. Within seconds, a towering inferno engulfed the structure, its heat intense enough to be felt even from the Drifter's position. The effect on the reclaimer formation was immediate. Standard protocol dictated that half their forces would investigate the explosion while the remainder maintained the perimeter. The Drifter waited until the response team had moved toward the burning building before taking his first shot. The shotgun roared, its modified shells loaded with fragmented metal that spread in a deadly pattern, striking 3 reclaimers simultaneously. Before they could identify his position, he had already moved to a different window, firing again to create the impression of multiple attackers. Vega seized the opportunity, descending from the maintenance platform with remarkable agility. Despite her injury, she engaged the remaining reclaimers from behind, her rifle work precise and economical. 3 quick shots, 3 bodies falling. The Drifter continued his supporting fire, creating corridors of temporary safety through which Vega could advance toward the apartment building. The reclaimers who had moved to investigate the explosion were now returning, having recognized the diversion for what it was. Their approach was cautious but determined, using smoke grenades to obscure their movements, a tactical choice that indicated experienced leadership. "East stairwell, 3rd floor," the Drifter transmitted through a short-range communicator he had found in Garrett's pack, guessing correctly that Vega would have a compatible device. 2 minutes before they seal all exits. He didn't wait for confirmation, already moving toward the rendezvous point. The stairwell would provide temporary defensibility while they coordinated their next move. As he descended to the 3rd floor, the building shook with the impact of heavier weapons. The reclaimers had escalated to grenade launchers, systematically destroying potential sniper positions. Vega arrived at the stairwell 30 seconds later, her breathing labored and her left arm hanging awkwardly. Blood had soaked through her jacket, but her eyes remained alert and focused. "Cutting it close," she commented, securing the stairwell door behind her. Calculated risk, the drifter replied, already examining her wound. The bullet had passed through. The fleshy part of her shoulder missing bone and major vessels, survivable but debilitating if not treated. "Can you still run?" "I'll keep up," she affirmed, the steel in her voice matched by the determination in her eyes. "Tell me you have." An exit strategy. The drifter withdrew the tablet from Garrett's pack, displaying the map. Underground maintenance tunnels connect this building to the old shopping center 2 blocks east. From there, we can access the storm drains that lead to the river. Vega studied the map, her expression shifting from determination to surprise. "This is Reclaimer tactical data, real-time positioning." She looked up sharply. "Where did you get this?" "A dying man named Garrett said he was carrying the market's insurance policy." The drifter watched her reaction carefully. "Seems like more than transaction records." Vega's eyes narrowed. "Much more. That's classified Reclaimer intelligence, patrol routes, outpost locations, supply lines." Her gaze locked with his. "Combined with what I'm carrying, it's enough to cripple their entire operation in this region." The building shook again as another explosion tore through the floors above them. Dust and concrete fragments rained down from the ceiling. "Explanations later," the drifter decided, securing the tablet and helping Vega to her feet. "We have 3 minutes before they start a systematic sweep." They descended to the basement level, navigating by the dim emergency lighting that still functioned in parts of the building. The maintenance tunnel entrance was concealed behind a storage rack, deliberately obscured, suggesting regular use by the market operators. The tunnel beyond was narrow but navigable, its concrete walls marked with directional symbols recognizable. To wasteland travelers, warnings about hazards, indications of safe paths, markers for emergency exits. The drifter led the way, maintaining a pace that pushed the limits of Vega's endurance without exceeding them. "They'll follow," Vega warned between labored breaths. "Standard procedure includes subsurface pursuit." "Counting on it," the drifter replied, withdrawing his second incendiary device as they reached a junction in the tunnel system. He planted it at a structural weak point, setting its timer for 2 minutes. That should discourage close pursuit. They continued eastward, the sounds of Reclaimer entry teams echoing through the tunnel network behind them. When the incendiary detonated, the concussion traveled through the confined space like a physical force, staggering them momentarily. The resulting cave-in would block that section of tunnel for hours, perhaps permanently. After 20 minutes of sustained movement, they reached the access point beneath the shopping center. Vega's condition had deteriorated, her face pale and her movements increasingly uncoordinated. Blood loss and exertion were taking their toll. "Need to rest," she admitted reluctantly, as they emerged into the cavernous space that had once been a department store's basement. "Just 5 minutes." The drifter assessed their situation. The shopping center appeared abandoned, but appearances in the wasteland were often deceiving. While Vega leaned against a support column, catching her breath, he conducted a perimeter check identifying potential threats and exit routes. The building had been picked clean by scavengers, its contents long since distributed throughout the wasteland economy. What remained were the skeletal displays and empty shelving units, the infrastructure too cumbersome to salvage. In one corner, evidence of recent occupation, a small campsite with the ashes of a fire still warm. The drifter returned to Vega, who had used their brief respite to dress her wound with supplies from her own pack. The field dressing was professional grade, another indication of her Reclaimer background. "Someone's been here recently," he informed her. "We should move." Vega nodded, struggling to her feet. The storm drain access should be near the loading docks, east side of the complex. As they navigated through the darkened shopping center, the drifter noticed Vega studying him with calculated interest. "You move like military," she observed, "but not Reclaimer, not Sanctuary either." "Former park ranger," he replied, offering the partial truth he used when necessary. "Wilderness search and rescue before that." That explains the navigation skills, Vega acknowledged, not the tactical proficiency. The drifter didn't respond. His past was irrelevant to their current situation, and sharing it created no advantage. They reached the loading docks without incident, locating the storm drain access. Beneath a collapsed section off-looring, the opening was tight, barely large enough for an adult to pass through, but it connected to a larger drainage system that would eventually lead to the river. Ladies first, the drifter offered pragmatically. If Vega lost consciousness in the narrow passage, extracting her would be nearly impossible. She understood the reasoning without explanation, lowering herself into the opening with a grimace of pain. The drifter followed immediately after, pulling a section of debris over the entrance to obscure their trail. The storm drain was claustrophobic, a concrete tube barely 4 feet in diameter, partially filled with stagnant water and accumulated waste. They proceeded on hands and knees, the fetid liquid soaking through their clothing. After 50 meters, the tube connected to a larger main line where they could finally stand upright, though hunched. 2 kilometers to the river, Vega estimated, her voice echoing in the confined space. Assuming this system hasn't collapsed somewhere ahead, the drifter consulted the tablet map, confirming her assessment. Map shows it intact, but data's 6 months old. They advanced in silence, conserving energy and remaining alert for sounds of pursuit. The drain system grew progressively larger, as tributary channels joined the main line, eventually opening into a collection chamber large enough to stand comfortably. Faint daylight filtered through a grated opening above, a street-level storm drain that provided both ventilation and a reference point for their location. Halfway there, the drifter noted, checking the map again. Reclaimer signals show they've split their forces, half still at Lancaster, half establishing a perimeter around the likely exit points along the river. Vega leaned against the chamber wall, her breathing shallow but controlled. They're good at containment, not so good at thinking outside their tactical playbook. She gestured to the tablet. That's why that data is so dangerous to them. It reveals their patterns. And what you're carrying? The drifter asked, seizing the moment to extract information that might prove valuable. Vega's expression hardened. Proof that the Reclaimer leadership isn't trying to restore order. They're establishing dominance, eliminating potential rivals and consolidating resources. She touched the inner pocket of her jacket where the data drive was secured, including evidence of mass executions at 3 settlements that refused to submit to their authority. The revelation wasn't entirely surprising. Rumors of Reclaimer brutality had circulated through the wasteland for months, but confirmation carried weight. Where were you taking it? The drifter pressed. Coalition of independent settlements to the west, Vega replied after a moment's hesitation. They're establishing a mutual defense pact. This evidence would bring more communities to their cause. The drifter absorbed this information, recalibrating his understanding of wasteland politics. A coalition strong enough to challenge the Reclaimers would disrupt the fragile balance of power, potentially triggering open warfare between the major factions. Chaos meant danger, but also opportunity for those positioned to navigate it. We should move, he decided, helping Vega to her feet. Another hour to the river, then we find a defensible position to rest properly. As they continued through the drainage system, the drifter considered their options. Lancaster was compromised, the market destroyed. His original plan to resupply and continue alone was no longer viable. Vega's information represented both danger and opportunity. Involvement with her cause would paint a target on his back, but the intelligence she provided could be crucial for navigating the changing wasteland landscape. The tunnel ahead curved sharply, then descended toward the sound of flowing water. They had reached the final section before the river. As the concrete tube gave way to a wide outfall, daylight blinded them momentarily. The river stretched before them, its surface shimmering with chemical residue, but offering a path away from their pursuers. On the opposite bank, the tree line provided potential cover if they could cross without detection. "Can you swim?" the drifter asked, surveying the water with concern. Its unnatural coloration suggested contamination, but the alternatives were limited. "Not well in this condition," Vega admitted, "but I don't see another choice." The drifter scanned the riverbank in both directions, assessing risks against dwindling options. The decision before him represented more than a tactical choice. It was a philosophical one. Continuing with Vega meant committing to something beyond his own survival, accepting responsibility for outcomes he couldn't control. The wasteland had taught him that attachments were liabilities. Yet, here he was, calculating how to keep both of them alive. "We cross at dusk," he decided. "Use the failing light to mask our movement. Until then, we rest and prepare." He gestured to a partially concealed alcove in the outfall structure. "I'll take first watch." Vega studied him with an expression that mixed gratitude with calculation. "Why are you helping me?" "Really?" The drifter considered the question, then answered with the truth that mattered. "Information is survival. What that data shows, changes the game. I intend to survive whatever comes next." Vega nodded, accepting his pragmatism without offense. "Fair enough. Wake me in 2 hours, assuming I'm not dead by then." As she settled into the alcove, the drifter positioned himself at the outfall entrance, his thoughts turning to the implications of the day's events. Lancaster's destruction marked the beginning of something larger, a shift in the wasteland's precarious equilibrium. Whether that shift would bring opportunity or annihilation remained to be seen. One certainty remained. Surviving the coming storm would require adaptability, intelligence, and resources. Perhaps for the first time since Haven's betrayal, it would also require an ally. Dusk descended over the wasteland, the fading light transforming the contaminated river into a ribbon of dark mercury stretching between barren shores. The drifter observed the opposite bank through his binoculars, scanning methodically for reclaimer patrols. They were there, disciplined and patient, maintaining positions that offered optimal coverage of likely crossing points. "3 teams that I can identify," he reported, lowering the binoculars. 2-person units, standard tactical spacing, there, expecting us. Vega had used the rest period to recover some strength. The field dressing on her shoulder was freshly changed, the old bandages burned to eliminate evidence of their presence. She studied the tablet, its screen dimmed to avoid detection in the growing darkness. "Their patrol pattern leaves a gap here." She indicated a section of riverbank, obscured by the remains of a collapsed bridge. "It's outside their standard search radius, based on estimated travel time from our last known position." The drifter considered. That's assuming they're operating on standard protocol." "They are," Vega said with certainty. "That's the reclaimer weakness, rigid adherence to procedure. Why improvise when the manual has a section for every contingency?" Her bitter tone revealed the depth of her disillusionment with her former comrades. The gap she identified was nearly a kilometer downstream, a significant deviation from their most direct route, but potentially their best option for crossing undetected. The challenge would be reaching it without exposing themselves to the patrols stationed at more obvious crossing points. "We follow the drainage outfall," the drifter decided, pointing to where the concrete structure extended into the water. "Stay submerged except for breathing. Current will help carry us downstream." Vega nodded, though concern flickered across her features. "The river water is toxic. Extended exposure causes chemical burns, possibly worse, which is why they won't expect us to use it as a transit route." The drifter began waterproofing critical supplies, wrapping electronics and ammunition in sealed bags from his pack. "We'll need to find clean water and medical supplies immediately after crossing." They prepared in silence, each focused on the task with practiced efficiency. The Drifter redistributed essential items between their packs, ensuring that critical supplies were duplicated in case one was lost during the crossing. When everything was secured, he produced a small container of petroleum jelly from his medkit. "Cover all exposed skin," he instructed, applying the substance to his face, neck, and hands. "Won't provide perfect protection against the chemical content, but it's better than nothing." Vega followed his example, grimacing as she worked the thick substance over her injured shoulder. "My mother used to put this on my face during winter," she commented unexpectedly, "to protect against windburn when we went skiing." The mention of life before, of mothers and leisure activities like skiing, was rare in wasteland conversations. Most survivors avoided such memories, finding them too painful to revisit. The Drifter didn't respond to the personal revelation, focusing instead on their immediate survival. "We move in 2 minutes. Stay close, conserve energy, and signal immediately if your condition deteriorates." They entered the water as darkness solidified around them. The liquid felt wrong against the skin, too viscous, with an unnatural warmth that spoke of chemical reactions occurring beneath its surface. The Drifter led, establishing a rhythm of movement that prioritized stealth over speed, using the concrete outfall structure for concealment as long as possible. When they reached the end of the outfall, they submerged completely, leaving only their faces exposed for breathing. The current caught them, stronger than anticipated, pulling them downstream toward their target crossing point. Theriva's chemical content stung their eyes and any skin not protected by the petroleum jelly barrier. Each breath required careful timing to avoid ingesting the contaminated water. The crossing became an exercise in controlled suffering, each minute in the toxic water increasing the likelihood of lasting damage. The Drifter maintained visual contact with Vega, noting with concern how the exertion affected her wounded shoulder. The bandage had dissolved in the caustic water, exposing the raw injury to contaminants. They passed the first reclaimer patrol point undetected, the river carrying them silently beyond the range of the team's night vision equipment. The second patrol proved more challenging. A sentry stationed directly on the water's edge, sweeping the river's surface with a powerful spotlight at irregular intervals. The Drifter signaled Vega to submerge completely as the light approached their position. They sank beneath the opaque surface, the toxic water closing over their heads. The caustic liquid seared the Drifter's nasal passages and pressed against his sealed eyelids with burning insistence. He counted seconds, calculating the maximum time. They could remain submerged against the patrol's likely spotlight pattern. When his lungs demanded air with increasing urgency, he kicked upward, breaking the surface with minimal disturbance. Vega emerged beside him, her breathing labored but controlled. The spotlight had moved on, now illuminating a section of river 50 meters upstream. They had cleared the second patrol point. The current accelerated as they approached the collapsed bridge, the river narrowing around the concrete debris that jutted from the water like broken teeth. Navigation became treacherous, requiring careful movement to avoid being dashed against the submerged obstacles or swept into exposed positions. The Drifter gestured toward a shadowed area beneath a section of fallen roadway, where the current slowed in a natural eddy. They made for this point, fighting against the river's pull with increasingly leaden limbs. The toxic water had begun to take its toll, creating a pervasive burning sensation wherever it contacted skin and a metallic taste that coated the tongue and throat. They reached the eddy and clung to a piece of exposed rebar, taking a moment to assess their position relative to the gap in the reclaimer patrol pattern. The tablet's waterproof case had performed its function. The screen illuminated briefly as the Drifter confirmed their location. 50 meters ahead, he whispered, his voice hoarse from chemical exposure. Low bank with tree cover beginning immediately at the shoreline. Vega nodded, her face contorted in a grimace of pain. The river water had washed away the blood from her wound, but the exposure had clearly exacerbated the injury. Despite this, her eyes remained alert and focused, a survivor's determination that the drifter recognized and respected. They pushed off from their temporary haven, allowing the current to carry them the final distance to their extraction point. As they approached the bank, the drifter scanned for the telltale signs of surveillance equipment or proximity alarms that would betray their crossing. Finding none, he signaled Vega to follow as he hauled himself from the toxic water onto the muddy shoreline. The relief of leaving the river was immediate but incomplete. Their clothing, saturated with contaminated water, continued to burn against their skin. The drifter led them directly into the tree line, putting distance between themselves and the exposed riverbank before stopping to address their condition. "Strip," he instructed without preamble. "Everything that touched the water needs to be cleaned or discarded." They removed their outer layers, using precious clean water from their packs to rinse the worst of the chemical residue from their skin. The darkness provided privacy that neither particularly sought. Survival concerns had long since superseded conventional modesty in the wasteland. The drifter examined Vega's shoulder wound in the dim light of a shielded penlight. The river's chemicals had cauterized the edges of the injury, a mixed blessing that prevented further bleeding but guaranteed scarring and potential long-term tissue damage. He applied a fresh field dressing from his medkit, noting with concern their dwindling medical supplies. "We need to find shelter and more substantial resources," he stated, surveying their surroundings. "This area isn't defensible long-term." Vega consulted the tablet, its glow illuminating her face in the darkness. "There's an abandoned reclaimer outpost 5 kilometers west," she suggested, "marked as decommissioned 6 months ago due to structural instability. Should have supplies if no one's scavenged it yet." The drifter considered this option. Reclaimers often booby-trap abandoned positions. "True," Vega acknowledged, "but I know their standard protocols for facility decommissioning. I can identify and disarm anything they left behind." It was a calculated risk, but their current situation left few alternatives. They needed medical supplies, clean water, and defensible shelter, all of which an abandoned outpost might provide. With their contaminated outer clothing rinsed as thoroughly as possible and left to dry on nearby branches, they dressed in spare layers from their packs and began the westward journey. The forest provided good cover but challenging terrain. Genetic mutations had altered the local flora, creating dense undergrowth with occasionally predatory characteristics. Twice they encountered carnivorous vine systems that required careful navigation to avoid triggering their motion-sensitive tendrils. Despite these obstacles, they maintained a steady pace, with Vega demonstrating impressive resilience given her injury. The drifter watched her with a professional's eye, noting how she adapted her movement to compensate for her wounded shoulder while conserving energy, the mark of someone extensively trained in survival techniques. "Former reclaimer tactics specialist," she explained, catching his evaluative gaze. 6 years with their strategic operations division before." She trailed off, then continued with deliberate vagueness. "Before I saw what they were really building toward." The drifter accepted this partial explanation without pressing for details. In the wasteland, everyone carried secrets alongside their supplies, emotional baggage carefully rationed like ammunition, revealed only when necessary. They reached the abandoned outpost shortly before midnight. The structure had once been a rural fire station, repurposed by the reclaimers to serve as a forward operating base. Its reinforced concrete construction had weathered the apocalypse better than most buildings, though one section of the roof had partially collapsed, creating the structural instability referenced in the reclaimer reports. They observed the building from the tree line for 30 minutes, confirming no signs of current occupation. When satisfied, Vega led them in a circular approach, identifying and pointing out the subtle indicators of security measures, disturbed soil patterns suggesting buried proximity sensors, suspiciously undisturbed debris that might conceal pressure. Plates, thin filaments stretched across obvious entry points. The Drifter was impressed despite himself. Her knowledge of reclaimer security protocols was comprehensive, allowing them to navigate the defensive perimeter without triggering alarms. They eventually accessed the building through a maintenance hatch that connected to the station's former vehicle inspection pit, a point deliberately left accessible for emergency retrieval of critical supplies. The interior was dark and musty, but structurally sound, apart from the compromised roof section. Evidence of the reclaimer's occupation remained. Reinforced positions at windows and doorways, communications equipment disabled but not removed, and most importantly, storage areas for supplies. Vega moved directly to a wall panel that appeared identical to its surroundings, pressing a specific sequence of points that caused it to swing outward, revealing a hidden compartment. Inside was exactly what they needed. Medical supplies, purified water, emergency rations, and ammunition compatible with their weapons. Standard reclaimer cache, she explained, beginning to sort through the supplies. Every outpost has one, accessible only to command-level personnel. They're never emptied during decommissioning, insurance against future needs. The Drifter evaluated the supplies with a survivor's practiced eye, calculating how to maximize their utility. The medical kit was particularly valuable, containing antibiotics that would help prevent infection from their river crossing, and synthetic skin patches that could properly seal Vega's wound. While she attended to her injury, the Drifter secured the building, establishing alarm triggers at potential entry points and identifying defensive positions should they need to repel intruders. When satisfied with their immediate security, he returned to find Vega examining the contents of the data drive she carried, displayed on a small device similar to the tablet from Garrett's pack. "Want to see what we're risking our lives for?" she asked, her tone suggesting a test of trust. The Drifter set down his weapon and joined her. The screen displayed what appeared to be internal reclaimer communications, operation orders, after-action reports, and resource allocation directives. Vega navigated to a specific folder labeled Phase 3 Implementation. The reclaimers presented themselves as preservers of order, former military and law enforcement united to rebuild society, she explained, her voice taking on a lecturer's cadence. That was true, initially, but the leadership evolved, becoming more focused on control, then protection. She opened a document containing a strategic plan for regional dominance. The language was clinical, discussing resource acquisition and resistance mitigation in terms that obscured the human cost of such actions. They are systematically eliminating any community that won't submit to their authority, Vega continued, opening a series of images that verified her claim. These are from 3 settlements that refused integration. Official reports claim they were lost to raider attacks or environmental disasters. The images told a different story: systematic execution of civilians, destruction of infrastructure, and confiscation of resources. The Drifter viewed them without visible reaction, though each frame burned itself into his memory alongside similar atrocities he had witnessed in the years since civilization's collapse. "This isn't unique to the reclaimers," he noted, his voice deliberately neutral. "Every faction has blood on its hands. The engineers exploit those under their protection for labor and experimentation. The Sanctuary's divine punishment includes ritualistic executions of non-believers. Power corrupts, especially when survival is at stake." Vega's expression hardened. "That doesn't make it acceptable or inevitable." She switched to another file, architectural. Plans for what appeared to be a network of connected outposts. This is what they're building toward. Complete regional control with automated defense systems to enforce compliance. They've recovered pre-fall military technology that gives them capabilities beyond any other faction. The Drifter studied the plans with growing concern. The system described would indeed shift the balance of power dramatically, creating a dominance that couldn't be effectively challenged by the other factions or independent settlements. The coalition needs this information, Vega pressed. With advance warning, they can prepare established countermeasures. Without it, they'll be systematically eliminated or absorbed. And you believe this coalition is different? The Drifter observed. That power won't corrupt them, as it has the others. Vega met his gaze directly. I believe in creating options. The Reclaimers want a world where submission is the only choice. I want one where people can choose their allegiance, or choose none. The parallel to his own philosophy wasn't lost on the Drifter. He had survived by avoiding allegiances entirely, maintaining independence through mobility and information. Yet the scenario Vega described would eventually eliminate that option. In a region completely controlled by Reclaimers, neutrality would become impossible. How far is this coalition? He asked, the question representing a tentative shift from immediate survival concerns to longer-term strategy. 3 days west, following the old highway system. Longer if we need to evade Reclaimer patrols, which we will. Vega studied him carefully. Are you considering it? The Drifter didn't answer directly. We should rest. Take alternating watches, 4 hours each. Reassess our options in the morning. As Vega prepared a sleeping area in the most defensible room of the former station, the Drifter conducted another perimeter check, using the solitude to process what he had learned. The information on both data carriers, Garrett's and Vega's, represented knowledge that could reshape the wasteland's power structure. Such knowledge was valuable, which made those who carried it targets. Traveling with Vega to the coalition would mean 3 days of heightened risk, moving through territory where Reclaimer presence was substantial. The rational choice was to part ways, returning to the solitary existence that had kept him alive. For years, yet something beyond rationality tugged at his decision-making process. Perhaps it was the recognition that true independence required the absence of absolute control by any faction. Perhaps it was the memory of Haven and how quickly security could transform into captivity when power concentrated in the wrong hands. Or perhaps, though he wouldn't have admitted it consciously, it was the simple human connection that had begun to form through shared survival. In a world that systematically stripped away humanity, such connections became rare and therefore precious, even to someone as determinedly self-reliant as the Drifter. When he returned from his perimeter check, Vega was already asleep. Her breathing, steady but shallow, one hand still near her weapon, the wasteland's version of peaceful rest. The Drifter took the first watch, positioning himself where he could monitor both the building's main entrance and Vega's sleeping form. As the hours passed, he found himself considering possibilities beyond immediate survival for the first time. In years, the wasteland had taught him to think in terms of days, not futures. Yet the information they carried forced a longer perspective, one where his choices now might determine whether any form of freedom remained possible. By the time he woke Vega for her watch, the Drifter had made his decision. Not from idealism or optimism, both long since burned away by the harsh realities of the wasteland, but from the pragmatic recognition that some threats required confrontation rather than avoidance. We head west at first light, he informed her as she took up her position. I'll help you reach the coalition. Vega accepted his decision with a simple nod, understanding that lengthy discussion or expressions of gratitude would be both unnecessary and unwelcome. In the wasteland, actions declared intentions more clearly than words ever could. As the Drifter settled into his own fitful rest, he reflected that while he might be deviating from his solitary path, his underlying purpose remained unchanged. Survival, not just of the body, but of the freedom to choose one's own way through whatever remained of the world. The journey west had proven more challenging than anticipated. For 2 days, they had navigated through increasingly hostile territory, avoiding reclaimer patrols whose frequency suggested a mobilization beyond normal operations. The tablet's real-time data had become their lifeline, allowing them to anticipate enemy movements and adjust their route accordingly. They now crouched at the edge of a vast clearing that had once been a rural community. Scorched foundations and melted remnants of vehicles were all that remained, the destruction too complete to have been caused by the initial collapse. This had been deliberate, systematic elimination of a settlement. Happened recently, the drifter observed, examining the ash that still shifted in the breeze. 3 weeks, maybe less. Vega's expression had hardened into something beyond anger, a cold fury tempered by resignation. Everton settlement, population 63, they were on the coalition contact list. She studied the destruction with professional detachment despite her evident emotional response. Incendiary deployment followed by ground sweep, standard reclaimer protocol for resistance centers. The devastation before them confirmed everything the data had shown. The reclaimers were accelerating their consolidation of power, eliminating potential opposition with clinical efficiency. What remained unclear was why now, what had triggered this escalation. We need to adjust our route, the drifter decided, consulting the tablet. Coalition headquarters is still 2 days west, but this suggests they're systematically targeting unknown alliance members. Vega nodded in agreement, but her attention had shifted to something in the distance, a glint of reflected light at the far edge of the destroyed settlement. "Movement," she whispered, raising her binoculars. 2 o'clock. Near the tree line, the drifter followed her gaze, focusing his own optics on the area she indicated. A figure moved cautiously between points of cover, stopping periodically to examine the ground. The pattern suggested someone tracking rather than patrolling, following. Signs with purpose. Not reclaimer, he assessed, noting the absence of their distinctive tactical gear. Solo operator. Hunter, maybe, or scavenger. "Whoever they are, they're heading this way," Vega observed. "Following our trail, maybe." The drifter silently cursed. Despite their precautions, they had left subtle signs of their passage. Compressed vegetation, displaced stones, marks that an experienced tracker could follow. The wasteland had many such individuals, some of whom made their living by locating valuable targets for the major factions. "Options?" Vega asked, deferring to his experience in evasion. The drifter weighed their choices with rapid calculation. Can't outrun a tracker in open terrain. Ambush is risky without knowing their capabilities. Best approach is controlled contact. Choose the meeting ground, establish defensive advantage, determine their intentions. They retreated into a grove of mutated pine trees, whose dense, low-hanging branches created natural concealment. The position offered multiple escape routes while providing clear sightlines to the primary approach. The drifter selected a fallen trunk as their meeting point, open enough to prevent the tracker from sensing a trap, yet positioned to give them tactical advantage. They settled into their positions, weapons ready but not immediately visible. Minutes stretched into an hour as they waited with the patience of experienced survivors. Finally, a deliberate sound announced the tracker's approach, a branch breaking underfoot, too perfectly placed to be accidental. It was a courtesy in the wasteland, a way of signaling peaceful intent by announcing one's presence, rather than appearing suddenly. "I know you're there," a voice called, female, with the particular rasp of someone who had spent years breathing contaminated air. "I'm not hunting you. I have information about your destination." The drifter exchanged a glance with Vega, whose expression reflected his own suspicion. Information offered freely was rare in the wasteland, usually bait for a trap. "Show yourself," the drifter responded, his tone neutral. Hands visible, weapons secured. A figure emerged from the tree line, a woman in her 50s, her weathered face marked with the distinctive scarring of chemical exposure. She wore practical clothing adapted for wasteland travel, and moved with the deliberate economy of someone conserving energy. Most notably, she carried no visible long weapons, though the drifter detected the outline of a sidearm holstered at her. "Hip, Mari Keller," she introduced herself, stopping at a respectful distance from their position. "Former communications specialist for Settlement Echo, Coalition affiliate." Vega visibly tensed at the mention of the Coalition. "Echo is on our route. What's your business tracking us?" Mari's expression remained carefully neutral. "Echo was raided 3 days ago. Reclaimers hit it with everything they had. Gunships, armored vehicles, ground forces, no survivors except those of us who were out on supply runs. The news landed like a physical blow. Echo was a significant coalition outpost, better defended than most independent settlements. If it had fallen so completely, the Reclaimers' capabilities exceeded even what Vega's intelligence had suggested. "How did you find us?" the Drifter asked, the more immediate security concern taking precedence. "Coalition established emergency. Now protocols for exactly this scenario," Mari explained. "All operatives in the field were torally at designated safe houses. I was heading to Point 17 when I spotted Reclaimer patrols moving in a search pattern. They're hunting someone specific." Her gaze shifted to Vega. Someone carrying sensitive information. The implications were clear. The Reclaimers knew about Vega's data and were committing significant resources to its recovery. The question was how they had obtained such specific intelligence. Vega seemed to reach the same conclusion. "There's a leak in the Coalition. Someone gave them our route, our objectives." Mari nodded grimly. "More than a leak. The Coalition headquarters was hit simultaneously with Echo and 3 other settlements. Coordinated strikes that knew exactly where to target leadership, communications, defense systems." She paused, the full weight of her next words evident in her expression. "The Coalition is gone, completely decapitated in a single operation." The revelation struck with devastating force. Their entire mission, the risks taken, the hardships endured, had been predicated on delivering crucial intelligence to an organization that no longer existed. "Verify," the Drifter demanded, instinctive skepticism asserting itself. Information this critical required confirmation. Mari reached slowly into her jacket, telegraphing her movements to avoid appearing threatening. She withdrew a communications device, military grade, with encryption capabilities beyond standard wasteland technology. "Coalition emergency band," she explained, activating the device, broadcasting continuously since the attacks. The speaker emitted only static, punctuated by an automated message repeating at regular intervals. "Attention all Coalition units. Central command compromised. Implement scatter protocol. Repeat, implement scatter protocol. This is not a drill." Vega's face had drained of color. "That's the authentic emergency code. Only senior leadership had authorization to activate it." Mari deactivated the device. "The Coalition is finished as an organized resistance. The best we can do now is survive undergroup, if possible." The Drifter processed this new reality with cold pragmatism. Their objective had vanished, but the danger remained, perhaps had even increased. The Reclaimers would continue hunting the data Vega carried, now with fewer distractions from competing targets. "How did you find us specifically?" he pressed. Still not fully satisfied with Mari's explanation. "I didn't find you specifically," she clarified. "I was tracking all movement in this sector, looking for other survivors. You two were moving with purpose toward Coalition territory. I took a chance that you might be friendlies." Plausible, but the Drifter's natural suspicion remained engaged. In the wasteland, coincidences were rare and often deadly. "What's your proposal?" Vega asked, clearly struggling to adapt to the collapse of her mission. "There's a fallback location," Mari revealed. "Not in any official documentation. A contingency established by a small group within leadership who suspected internal security. Might be compromised. Limited access, heavily defended. If Fanyuan survive to continue resistance, they'll gather there." "Location?" the Drifter inquired, though he anticipated the answer. "I can take you there," Mari replied predictably. "Too sensitive to share otherwise." The classic dilemma of wasteland encounters, trust required for survival, yet potentially fatal if misplaced. The drifter evaluated Mari with experienced eyes, noting the authentic weathering of her gear, the calluses on her hands consistent with her claimed background, the particular pattern of her chemical exposure scars that matched. Known eco-territory contamination. "Give us a moment," he requested, moving back with Vega to confer privately. "Could be legitimate," Vega whispered once they were out of earshot. "The scatter protocol is authentic, and the coordinated strikes match reclaimer capabilities. Could also be an elaborate trap," the drifter countered. "Perfect way to acquire your data without direct confrontation," Vega nodded, acknowledging the risk. "But if there is a resistance remnant, the information I'm carrying becomes even more crucial. It might be the only advantage left." The drifter considered their options, none of them ideal. Continuing toward the now destroyed coalition headquarters was pointless. Attempting to establish independent contact with potential survivors would be time-consuming and dangerous. Accepting Mari's guidance represented significant risk, but also the most direct path to resolving their mission, if her story was true. A fourth option existed: abandon the mission entirely, separate from Vega, return to the solitary existence that had kept him alive for years. It would be the safest choice for his personal survival. Yet as he considered this option, the drifter found himself reluctant in a way that surprised him. Something had shifted during their days of shared survival, creating a connection that transcended mere pragmatic alliance. More importantly, the information they carried represented something beyond personal survival, the possibility of resistance against a force that would eventually make independence impossible for anyone. "We go with her," he decided finally, "but on our terms. Separate travel patterns, predetermined rendezvous points, weapons ready. First sign of deception, we disappear." Vega studied him with an expression that suggested she understood the significance of his choice. Agreed. They returned to where Mari waited patiently, her posture deliberately non-threatening yet alert, the stance of someone accustomed to wasteland negotiations. "We'll follow your lead," the drifter informed her, "with conditions." As he outlined their terms, the drifter maintained careful observation of Mari's reactions. Her acceptance without argument could indicate either honesty or a well-prepared deception. The truth would reveal itself in the journey ahead. What remained certain was that their path had irrevocably changed. The destruction of the coalition had transformed their mission from information delivery to something more fundamental, the preservation of resistance itself. Whether this transformation represented opportunity or catastrophe remained to be seen. The wasteland had taught the drifter that adaptation was survival. Now that principle would be tested as never before. 3 days of cautious travel had brought them to the edge of what had once been a national forest. The landscape had transformed dramatically since the fall. Once majestic trees, now twisted into grotesque formations by chemical exposure and radiation, creating a labyrinthine environment of dense undergrowth and unstable terrain. Wildlife had adapted as well, producing mutations that made every rustle in the vegetation potentially lethal. Mari led them along a barely visible trail that wound through the mutated forest. True to the agreement, they had maintained separation during travel. Mari 50 meters ahead, the drifter and Vega following at intervals, communicating through discreet hand signals and occasional whispered exchanges via short-range radio. "We're close," Mari announced during their brief rest at midday. "Another 3 hours to the perimeter, assuming we don't encounter complications." The drifter studied their surroundings with professional wariness. The forest had grown increasingly dense, limiting visibility and creating countless potential ambush points. His instincts, honed through years of survival, detected something amiss, though he couldn't precisely identify the source of his unease. "You've been watching the tree line for the past hour," Vega observed quietly. "What are you seeing?" "Not seeing," the drifter corrected. "Feeling. The forest is too quiet." Vega listened, recognizing the truth in his observation. The mutated ecosystem usually buzzed with the sounds of adapted insects and small predators. Now an unnatural silence pressed around them, broken only by the occasional creak of wind-swayed branches. Could be a nearby predator suppressing smaller wildlife, she suggested, though her tone indicated she didn't fully believe this explanation. Or human activity, the drifter countered. Recent and substantial enough to disrupt established patterns. Murray had approached during their exchange, her expression troubled. "He's right. The silence isn't natural." She hesitated, then added, "We should adjust our route, move northwest for 2 kilometers, then approach from a different angle." The recommendation made tactical sense, yet the drifter's suspicion remained engaged. Throughout their journey, Mari had demonstrated professional competence and consistent behavior that supported her story. Still, wasteland survival depended on maintaining healthy skepticism. "Why that specific direction?" he questioned. "The fallback location has 3 approach vectors," Mari explained, each with recognition protocols to prevent friendly fire incidents. "The northwest approach is longer, but offers better cover." Again, reasonable, but something in her delivery triggered the drifter's finely tuned sense for deception. A slight tension around her eyes, perhaps, or a fractional delay before her response. He exchanged a glance with Vega, whose subtle nod confirmed she had detected the same inconsistency. "Northwest it is," the drifter agreed, deliberately concealing his suspicion. "You lead, same separation pattern as before." As Mari moved ahead to scout the proposed route, Vega activated their short-range communicator, speaking in a whisper that wouldn't carry beyond their immediate position. "She's hiding." "Something," Vega assessed. "This explanation makes sense but feels rehearsed." "Agreed," the drifter responded, checking his weapons with methodical precision. "Could be legitimate security protocols she's not authorized to share. Could be something else." They followed Mari's lead, but with heightened vigilance, both now, scanning not just for external threats, but for any indication of betrayal from their guide. The forest's unnatural silence persisted, creating a pressure that seemed to amplify every sound they made. The crunch of dead vegetation underfoot, the subtle shifting of equipment in their packs. An hour into their northwestern detour, the drifter detected the first concrete sign of human activity, a tripwire barely visible among the underbrush, connected to what appeared to be a noise-making device rather than an explosive. An alarm system, not designed to kill but to alert. He signaled Vega, who nodded her understanding. Ahead, Mari had already navigated around the trap without disarming it, further evidence that she knew the security systems intimately. The traps increased in frequency and sophistication as they progressed. Motion sensors disguised as mutated fungi, pressure plates concealed beneath seemingly random debris, tripwires connected to flashbang devices designed to disorient rather than harm. All suggested a perimeter defense established by professionals with access to pre-fall military technology. "Approaching recognition point," Mari announced via communicator as they reached a small clearing dominated by the twisted remains of what might once have been a park ranger station. "Wait here while I make contact," the drifter observed as Mari approached the dilapidated structure, noting how she moved with practiced precision to specific points in the clearing, deliberately making herself visible from particular angles. She was following a protocol, establishing identity through a predetermined sequence of movements that would be recognized by hidden observers. "Recognition signals," Vega confirmed, clearly familiar with similar systems from her reclaimer background. "Standard procedure for approaching secured locations. Seems legitimate." Yet something still bothered the drifter, an incongruity he couldn't quite identify until Mari completed her sequence and turned back toward them with a subtle gesture to approach. "Did you see it?" he whispered to Vega. "See what?" She signaled. "Two friendlies in her sequence. She's been expecting us to follow her all along." Understanding dawned in Vega's expression. "Which means she knew exactly who we were when she found us. This wasn't a coincidence." Before they could discuss the implications further, movement from the ranger station demanded their attention. A section of wall that had appeared solid swung outward, revealing a concealed entrance. Two figures emerged, dressed in mismatched tactical gear that bore no faction insignia, deliberately anonymous in a world where allegiances meant targets. "Bring them in," one called to Mari. "Quickly, reclaim a drone sweep expected in 20 minutes. The Drifter and Vega exchanged a final glance, silently acknowledging the risk they were about to take. With weapons ready but not raised, a delicate balance between preparedness and provocation, they followed Mari toward the hidden entrance. The interior of the ranger station was a masterpiece of deception. What had appeared from outside to be a collapsed structure was, in fact, a carefully maintained facility, its dilapidated exterior concealing a network of reinforced chambers connected by narrow corridors. Advanced equipment hummed with quiet efficiency: communications arrays, surveillance monitors, weapon fabrication stations. Most impressively, the facility had continuous power, suggesting either a well-maintained generator system or, more valuable still, a functioning solar array. They were led through a security checkpoint where their weapons were noted but not confiscated, a promising sign in a world where disarmament usually preceded betrayal. Beyond the checkpoint, the corridor opened into what had clearly been the station's main room, now converted into an operations center. Maps covered the walls, detailed tactical displays showing reclaimer positions, supply routes, and patrol patterns. Some of the information matched what appeared on Garrett's tablet, but much was new, suggesting an intelligence network that had survived the Coalition's destruction. In the center of the room, a figure bent over a communications console, back turned. To the new arrivals, at their entrance, the figure straightened and turned, a man in his 60s, his left arm ending in a mechanical prosthesis of pre-fall design. His face bore the distinctive scarring of someone who had survived the initial chemical storms without adequate protection. Yet his eyes remained sharp and evaluative. "Commander Vega," he acknowledged with a nod toward her. "Your timing is either excellent or catastrophic, depending on the news you bring." The familiar address confirmed the Drifter's suspicion that Mari had recognized Vega specifically, not merely as a potential ally. More significantly, the man's greeting carried the weight of established authority, someone accustomed to command. "Director Harlow," Vega responded, her tone mixing surprise with evident relief. "Reports of the Coalition's destruction weren't exaggerated. The Coalition as a formal structure is gone," Harlow confirmed grimly. 87% of leadership eliminated in coordinated strikes. Communications infrastructure destroyed, supply networks compromised. His artificial hand clenched. With a soft, mechanical whir. "A devastating blow, but not our extinction, not yet. Commander Vega, your expertise will be invaluable in planning this operation." His gaze shifted to the Drifter. "Your role is less clear. You've fulfilled your obligation by bringing Vega and the data safely here. No one would fault you for considering that mission complete." The statement was delivered without pressure or judgment, a genuine acknowledgement that the Drifter had no obligation to involve himself in what was clearly a high-risk operation with minimal chance of success. The rational choice was obvious: take the opportunity to extract himself from a deteriorating situation. Return to the solitary existence that had kept him alive while organizations and communities crumbled around him. Yet, as the Drifter considered this path, he found himself calculating not just its immediate safety, but its long-term implications. If the automated security network activated, independence itself would become impossible. Every movement would be tracked, every resource acquisition monitored, every attempt at self-determination eliminated. The wasteland had taught him that survival sometimes required calculated risk, that safety today could lead to annihilation tomorrow. "I have experience with infiltration and demolition," he stated, the decision crystallizing as he spoke, "and I know how to move unseen in hostile territory." Harlow studied him with newfound interest. "Former military?" "Something like that," the Drifter replied, deliberately vague. A knowing look crossed Harlow's weathered features. "Good enough. Report to tactical planning in 30 minutes. We'll see where your skills fit best." As Harlow moved away to coordinate the developing operation, Vega turned to the Drifter with a question in her eyes. "You don't have to do this," she said quietly. "You've already done more than most would." The Drifter surveyed the room. The maps, the equipment, the determined faces of people preparing for what might be their final mission. In a world defined by self-interest and survival, they represented something increasingly rare: collective purpose. "Some threats can't be outrun," he replied simply. "Sometimes survival means making a stand." The words surprised him even as he spoke them, a philosophy he had long since abandoned, resurging in the face of an existential threat. Whether this represented growth or fatal idealism remained to be seen. What was certain was that the countdown had begun. 72 hours to infiltrate an impenetrable facility and prevent the activation of a system that would extinguish the last embers of freedom in the wasteland. The most important mission of his life, perhaps of any life that remained, had just begun. Darkness enveloped the Reclaimer development facility, its massive silhouette blotting out the stars like a jagged wound in the night sky. Searchlights swept methodically across the perimeter, illuminating the multiple security barriers. Electrified fencing, motion sensors, automated turrets that protected the heart of their technological advantage. The Drifter lay motionless, in the undergrowth 300 meters from the outer fence, his body covered in a paste of mud and crushed vegetation that masked both his heat signature and scent. Through specialized optics, he observed the patrol patterns, mentally timing the intervals between searchlight sweeps and guard rotations. "Primary entrance is overwatched by 2 sniper positions and automated detection systems," he reported via subvocal microphone. The sound carried through bone conduction to avoid audio detection, consistent with the intelligence. No deviations from expected security protocols. In his earpiece, Harlow's voice responded from the command post 5 kilometers back. "Confirmed. Vega's team is in position at the southeastern approach. Awaiting your signal to initiate Phase 1. The infiltration plan had been meticulously developed over the previous 48 hours, leveraging Vega's inside knowledge of Reclaimer protocols and the Drifter's expertise in evasion techniques. The operation balanced distraction, deception, and precise timing, their only advantages against the overwhelming security force. "Executing in 3, 2, 1. The Drifter whispered, activating the first of several remote devices positioned around the facility's perimeter during their reconnaissance. Exactly 2.7 kilometers from his position, a series of explosions erupted, not large enough to cause significant damage, but sufficient to trigger perimeter alarms and draw attention. As expected, 2 of the searchlights immediately swung toward the disturbance, and radio chatter indicated security teams deploying to investigate. He turned his attention to the Drifter, evaluating him with the practiced assessment of someone accustomed to rapid personnel judgments. "And your companion?" "He saved my life. Multiple times," Vega replied before the Drifter could speak. "And he's helping transport critical intelligence." Harlow's expression remained neutral, but his posture shifted subtly, a relaxation of tension that suggested provisional acceptance. "Then he's welcome for now." He gestured toward the maps. "We have much to discuss, but first, the intelligence you're carrying. Is it what we hoped?" Vega nodded, reaching carefully into her jacket to extract the data drive. Everything we suspected about Phase 3 confirmed with documentation. Target lists, deployment schedules, technological capabilities, evidence of atrocities that could potentially fracture their internal command structure if properly leveraged. Harlow's expression darkened as he accepted the drive. Unfortunately, there may not be time to leverage anything. The timetable has accelerated dramatically. He turned toward the largest map, which displayed the region with current reclaimer positions marked in ominous red clusters. They're preparing for something big. All outposts are on high alert. Patrols have doubled. Supply convoys are moving, with triple the normal security. The data confirms their intentions, Vega explained. They've developed an automated security network, integrated surveillance and weapons platforms linked to a central command system. Once deployed, it would establish complete control over the entire region. We know, Harlow replied grimly. What we didn't know was when. He pointed to a location on the map marked with a distinctive symbol, a circle containing a stylized lightning bolt. This is their primary development facility. The system hub is there, prepared for deployment. His finger moved to various points throughout the region. These are the planned node locations for the network. According to our latest intelligence, activation is scheduled for 72 hours from now. The implications hung heavy in the air. Once activated, such a system would make resistance not merely difficult, but impossible. Every movement, every gathering, every attempt at organization would be detected and eliminated with mechanical efficiency. How accurate is your intelligence? The drifter asked, breaking his silence. The question earned him sharp looks from several of the room's occupants, but Harlow merely smiled thinly. Legitimate question. Our source is highly placed within the Reclaimer command structure, the same source that warned us of the Coalition strikes, unfortunately too late to prevent them, but in time for some of us to escape. You have a mole in Reclaimer command, the drifter translated, impressed despite his natural skepticism. Infiltrating the Reclaimers at that level would require exceptional resources and patience. Harlow corrected grimly. Communication ceased 12 hours ago. We must assume compromise. The situation crystallized with brutal clarity. The Resistance had 72 hours to prevent the activation of a system that would render their continued existence impossible, with their primary intelligence source potentially compromised. What's the plan? Vega asked, already shifting mentally from messenger to operative. Harlow gestured toward a smaller map that showed the development facility in detailed relief. We've been preparing for this contingency. Operation Blackout. Strike team infiltrates the facility, plants charges at key structural points, and destroys the central hub before the system can be activated. Suicide mission, the drifter assessed bluntly, studying the facility's defensive layout. Multiple perimeter barriers, guard towers with overlapping fields of fire, internal security checkpoints, a fortress designed to repel precisely the kind of attack Harlow described. High risk, Harlow acknowledged, but not necessarily suicide with the right team and proper intelligence. He turned to Vega. Your data might provide the edge we need. Details of internal security, patrol schedules, access protocols, anything that could facilitate infiltration. Vega was already reviewing the information on her device. I have schematics of the facility, security rotation schedules, and authentication codes, though those might have been changed if they suspected a leak. It's more than we had an hour ago, Harlow noted with grim determination. He surveyed the room, his gaze settling on key individuals. We move to operational planning. I need team composition recommendations within 2 hours, equipment inventory by dusk, insertion plan finalized by midnight. The room erupted into purposeful activity, years of training overriding the desperation of their situation. Harlow turned back to Vega and the drifter. Phase 1 initiated, he confirmed. Security response consistent with predictions. Executing Phase 2. The Drifter extracted a specialized device from his pack, a signal interceptor developed by the Resistance's technical team. When activated, it would briefly disrupt the facility's sensor network, creating a 30-second window in which the motion detection systems would reset, allowing for movement through the normally monitored zones. Phase 2. Ready on my mark, he transmitted. 3, 2, 1, mark. He activated the device. On the facility's perimeter, several indicator lights flickered momentarily as the security system processed the disruption. In that precise window, the Drifter moved with controlled urgency from his hiding place toward the fence, covering 30 meters of open ground in complete silence. Reaching the perimeter barrier, he extracted a second device, a localized EMP generator that would temporarily disable the electrical current in a section of fence just large enough to allow passage. The technology was rare and precious, scavenged from pre-fall military hardware and meticulously repurposed. Eastern approach secure, Vega's voice reported through his earpiece. Ready for synchronized entry. Acknowledged, the Drifter responded. Initiating in 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. He activated the EMP device. A soft pulse emitted, and the indicator lights on the nearest fence post dimmed. Using specialized cutters, he swiftly created an opening barely large enough for a human body to squeeze through, then proceeded to the next barrier. The infiltration progressed with methodical precision, each team member executing their assigned tasks within seconds of the projected timeline. When unexpected security responses occurred, they adapted with the fluidity of experienced operators, communicating through minimal coded transmissions that would be meaningless if intercepted. 23 minutes after initial breach, the Drifter reached the facility's main structure, a massive concrete bunker partially embedded in the mountainside. Here, the most challenging phase began. Internal infiltration. Outside, they could use the environment for concealment. Inside, they would face enclosed spaces with comprehensive surveillance and armed patrols. Approaching checkpoint Alpha, he subvocalized. Biometric barrier as expected. The entrance before him required palm print, retinal scan, and voice recognition. Security measures impossible to bypass directly. Their plan relied instead on Vega's alternative approach. Maintenance access point confirmed, her voice responded. In his ear, utility tunnel shows signs of recent use, proceeding with bypass. While the Drifter maintained position outside the main entrance, monitoring security response and prepared to create a diversion if needed, Vega's team was accessing the facility through a less obvious route. Maintenance tunnels designed for service. Access to the environmental and power systems. Minutes passed, with excruciating slowness. Every moment extended their exposure and risk of detection. The Drifter remained perfectly still, controlling his breathing and heart rate through techniques developed over years of survival. His focus remained absolute, senses hyper-attuned to the slightest changes in his environment. "We're in," Vega finally reported, proceeding to primary junction. Security heavier than anticipated, automated systems plus two-person patrols at 6-minute intervals. Acknowledged, the Drifter responded, maintaining position as backup extraction. A route. Their infiltration plan had designated multiple roles, with the Drifter serving as both external security and emergency extraction specialist. His experience in evasion and survival made him the ideal person to secure escape routes should the operation deteriorate. The operation timeline projected 17 minutes for Vega's team to reach the central hub, where the automated security network's core processors were housed. For 12 of those minutes, communication maintained expected patterns, brief updates, position reports, security observations. Then, silence. "Vega, report status," Harlow demanded from the command post. No response. "Team Bravo, status check." He tried again. The silence extended, implications multiplying with each passing second. Detection or equipment failure were the optimistic scenarios. The alternatives were capture or elimination. Director, recommend immediate execution of contingency protocol. The Drifter transmitted, already shifting from his observation position toward the maintenance access point Vega's team had used. Negative, Harlow responded firmly. Maintain position until confirmation of compromise. The Drifter hesitated, years of survival instinct warring with operational discipline. Standard protocol dictated withdrawal when communication failed to preserve operational security. Yet abandoning the mission meant allowing the automated network to activate, a death sentence for the resistance and anyone seeking independence in the wasteland. Decision crystallized into action. Moving to verify. Team status, he transmitted, deliberately not waiting for approval, will establish visual confirmation of situation. Ignoring Harlow's objections, the Drifter navigated to the maintenance access point, finding it secured exactly as Vega's team had left it, a positive indicator that they had at least successfully entered. He slipped inside, moving through the utility, tunnels with the silent efficiency that had kept him alive for years. The tunnels smelled of rust and ozone, the air heavy with machinery-warmed humidity. Periodic junction boxes provided minimal illumination, casting elongated shadows that both concealed his movement and complicated navigation. He followed Vega's trail, subtle marks left deliberately for exactly this contingency, visible only to someone who knew to look for them. As he approached the central sections of the facility, the first evidence of what had happened became apparent. A body slumped in an access corridor, wearing the distinctive tactical gear of Vega's team. The operative, Harris, if he recalled correctly, had died from a single precision shot to the head. The wound pattern was consistent with Reclaimer tactical units. The Drifter examined the scene with professional detachment, noting details that told the story of what had transpired. No signs of prolonged exchange. This had been an ambush, not a chance encounter. The team had been expected, compromise confirmed, he transmitted to Harlow. At least one operative down. Evidence suggests ambush, not random detection. Assessment. Harlow's voice had shifted from command to grim inquiry. They knew we were coming, the Drifter replied simply. Specific route, specific timing. The implications hung unspoken between them. Either their intelligence had been flawed, or someone had betrayed the operation. Mission parameters remain unchanged, Harlow decided after a moment's silence. Primary objective is destruction of the network hub. Proceed with extreme caution. The Drifter continued deeper into the facility, encountering two more fallen team members before reaching a junction that opened into a larger technical area. From concealment, he observed the space beyond, a massive chamber dominated by server racks and cooling systems. At its center stood what could only be the core processor for the automated security network, a reinforced enclosure containing specialized computing hardware connected to multiple power sources, the objective and the trap. Vega knelt in the center of the room, hands secured behind her back, face bloodied but conscious. Around her stood 6 Reclaimer tactical operatives, weapons ready. Supervising them was a figure the Drifter recognized from intelligence briefings, Commander Ezra Tanner, Reclaimer Chief of Security Operations. Your Resistance colleagues should be arriving at their insertion points across the region right about now, Tanner was saying to Vega, his tone conversational despite the circumstances. Executing their portions of Operation Blackout, the simultaneous strike against our network nodes that you so carefully planned. He checked his watch with theatrical precision. And walking directly into waiting security teams at each location, the Drifter processed this information with cold calculation. The operation hadn't merely been compromised, it had been completely exposed, with countermeasures prepared at every target location. The Resistance had committed its remaining resources to a coordinated strike that was about to become a massacre. "How many of your people will die tonight, Commander Vega?" Tanner continued. 50? 100? The last remnants of organized resistance eliminated in a single operation. He crouched to meet her eyes level. "And all because you trusted the wrong person." The drifter's mind raced, evaluating options against dwindling time. Direct engagement was suicide. The tactical operatives were positioned for maximum coverage, and he was significantly outgunned. Withdrawal meant abandoning Vega and accepting the failure of the mission. Neither was acceptable. A third option existed, but required perfect execution and acceptance of potentially fatal risk. He examined the chamber's layout, noting the coolant pipes that fed the server systems, the power conduits that supplied the processors, the structural supports that had been identified as demolition targets in the original plan. Most critically, he observed the fire suppression system, tanks of specialized chemical retardant positioned to protect the delicate electronics. A plan formed, desperate but viable. "Director," he subvocalized, "mission is compromised completely. Resistance teams across the region are walking into ambushes. Recommend immediate abort signal to all operational units." Harlow's response was immediate. "Transmitting abort codes now. Can you still reach the primary objective?" "Affirmative," the drifter replied, already extracting components from his pack and assembling them with practiced efficiency, but not as planned. "Preparing alternative approach. Advise immediate evacuation of command post. Significant reclaimer response likely." While Tanner continued his monologue, clearly enjoying the psychological torture of revealing the extent of the betrayal to Vega, the drifter completed assembly of a makeshift device, combining the remaining EMP generator with the demolition charges. Intended for the server hub, his plan was simple in concept, nearly impossible in execution. Use the EMP to temporarily disable the facility's internal security systems, neutralize the tactical team, free Vega, and place the charges at key structural points. The difficulty lay in the timing and the fact that he would be outnumbered 6-1 by elite operators in an enclosed space with limited cover. "Executing in 30 seconds. He transmitted to Harlow. "If successful, we'll extract via emergency route Charlie. If not, the intelligence in Garrett's pack contains everything you need to rebuild." "Understood," Harlow responded. Professional. Composure masking whatever emotional response he might have had to what was essentially a suicide mission. "Good hunting." The drifter positioned the EMP device where its effect would reach the chamber's electrical systems, set its timer for 15 seconds, then extracted his final remaining resources, a flashbang grenade modified for enhanced disorientation effect, his sidearm with the last magazine of ammunition, and a combat knife for close quarters. When the EMP detonated, he would have approximately 3 seconds before the tactical team recovered from the initial confusion. In those 3 seconds, he needed to enter the chamber, deploy the flashbang, and begin neutralizing threats. The odds were nearly impossible. But in the wasteland, survival had always been a matter of accomplishing the impossible. He started the timer and prepared to move. 10 seconds, 5. The EMP detonated with a high-pitched whine, followed by the distinctive pop of electrical systems failing. Emergency lights flickered and died. Security cameras went dark. The drifter was moving before the sound faded, bursting from concealment into the chamber. The flashbang followed, detonating in the center of the tactical team with blinding light and concussive force. Enhanced by the enclosed space, its effect was devastating, the operatives staggering from the sensory overload. The drifter moved through the chaos with lethal precision, years of survival instinct channeled into controlled violence. His first shots eliminated the 2 operatives who had maintained their weapons despite the disorientation. The third and fourth fell to precisely placed strikes that targeted vulnerable points in their tactical gear. Tanner recovered faster than his team, drawing his sidearm with practiced speed. The shot caught the drifter along his left side, burning, a path across his ribs but missing vital organs. He returned fire without breaking stride, forcing Tanner cover behind the server enclosure. The remaining two operatives had regained enough function to present a coordinated threat. The drifter engaged them directly, using the server racks as partial cover while closing distance. His ammunition depleted, he switched to the combat knife, the confined space transforming from disadvantage to advantage as his experience in close-quarter survival came to bear. When the brief, brutal exchange ended, the drifter stood breathing, heavily amid the aftermath, bleeding from multiple wounds, but still functional. Tanner had disappeared in the chaos, a concerning development, but secondary to the mission objective. He moved swiftly to Vega, cutting her restraints. "Status? Functional," she replied grimly, retrieving a weapon from a fallen operative. Tanner went for the manual override. "He's activating the network early." Together they moved toward the server enclosure, where the demolition charges would have maximum effect. As they worked to place the explosives, alarms began to sound throughout the facility. Tanner had triggered emergency protocols. "Charges set," Vega announced, programming the detonator. 10-minute timer to give us extraction clearance. "Not enough," the drifter assessed, hearing the thunder of approaching reinforcements echoing through the corridors. "We need more immediate effect." Understanding passed between them, the unspoken acknowledgement that survival might not be compatible with mission success. "Manual detonation," Vega concluded, her expression hardening with resolve. "I'll stay. You extract with the intelligence. The resistance will need it to continue." The drifter considered this, measuring mission requirements against personal values he had long suppressed in the name of survival. In the wasteland, attachments were liabilities. Yet in this moment, the thought of abandoning Vega to ensure his own survival felt like a betrayal of something essential. Both or neither, he decided, examining the detonator configuration. There's another way. Working swiftly, he modified the trigger mechanism, creating a remote activation option that would allow them additional distance before detonation. It reduced the certainty of success, but created the possibility that both the mission and their survival might be achieved. As the sounds of approaching forces grew louder, they moved with urgent purpose toward the maintenance tunnels, their best hope for extraction. The facility had transformed into a storm of alarms and mobilizing security teams, all focused on preventing their escape. They navigated the labyrinthine passages, encountering and neutralizing 2 security teams before reaching the outer sections of the facility. The drifter's wounds slowed their progress, blood loss beginning to affect his coordination and decision-making. "Almost clear," Vega encouraged, supporting his weight as they approached the maintenance exit. 300 meters to minimum safe distance. The night air hit them with bracing clarity as they emerged from the facility. Behind them, the full might of Reclaimer security had mobilized, vehicles deploying, search teams fanning out, air support preparing to launch. They reached the minimum safe distance as the first search teams appeared at the perimeter fence. Taking cover behind a ridge of broken concrete, the drifter extended the remote detonator. "Ready?" he asked, finger poised above the trigger. Vega's hand closed over his, a gesture both of solidarity and shared responsibility. Together, they activated the detonator. For a moment, nothing happened, a heart-stopping failure that threatened everything they had sacrificed to achieve. Then the night erupted with blinding light and concussive force as the charges detonated, the explosion magnified by the facility's own power systems and combustible materials. The automated security network's central hub disappeared in a fireball that reached toward the stars, its destruction ensuring that the wasteland would remain, for a time at least, beyond the reach of total control. As the shockwave washed over their position, the drifter and Vega were already moving, wounded but alive. their mission accomplished against impossible odds. In a world defined by survival at any cost, they had discovered something unexpected, that some principles were worth risking everything to defend, and that even in the wasteland, humanity's essential freedom could not be extinguished without resistance. The journey ahead remained uncertain, the wasteland no less dangerous for their victory. But in this moment, as they disappeared into the darkness beyond the burning facility, one truth emerged with clarity. In a world without shelter or mercy, the human spirit remained the one thing that could not be conquered. Dawn broke over the wasteland, painting the horizon in hues of amber and crimson that mirrored the distant fires still burning at the reclaimer facility. The Drifter and Vega had traveled through the night, putting critical distance between themselves and the inevitable pursuit. Now, from the vantage point of a ridgeline overlooking the region, they paused to assess both their situation and the impact of their mission. The Drifter's wounds had been treated with their remaining medical supplies, field dressings and antibiotics sufficient to prevent immediate deterioration, but inadequate for proper healing. Each movement sent fresh pain through his body, a constant reminder of how narrowly they had escaped death. Vega studied the tactical data on her device, monitoring the communications, frequencies used by resistance cells throughout the region. Confirmation coming in from 3 sectors, she reported, the exhaustion in her voice tempered by satisfaction. The abort signal reached most teams in time. Those who were already engaged managed to extract with minimal casualties. And the network? The Drifter asked, focusing on the operation's primary objective. Destroyed beyond recovery, Vega confirmed. Harlow's technical team estimates it will take the reclaimers at least 6 months to rebuild the central processing system, longer to reconnect the regional nodes. 6 months. Half a year for the resistance to regroup, to establish new safe houses and communication protocols, top repair for the next phase of the conflict. In the accelerated timeline of the wasteland, where survival was measured in days and weeks, 6 months represented an eternity of possibility. What will you do now? Vega asked, turning to study her companion's weathered face. The Drifter considered the question, examining options that would have seemed inconceivable mere weeks ago. His path had always been solitary, defined by movement and detachment. The mission had changed something fundamental in his calculation of survival. The wasteland is shifting, he observed, factions evolving, power concentrating. Independence becomes harder to maintain in isolation. Vega nodded, understanding the implications beyond what was directly stated. Harlow is establishing a new coalition base in the Western Territories, less centralized than before, cells operating with greater autonomy, but shared intelligence. She hesitated, then added, "Someone with your skills would be valuable." The Drifter looked out across the scarred landscape, the broken highways and collapsed structures, the mutated forests and chemical waterways. A world of no shelter and no mercy, where survival had always demanded ruthless self-interest. Yet within that harshness, pockets of humanity persisted, people who chose cooperation over predation, who built rather than merely consumed. "I'll consider it," he replied, the words representing a profound shift from his previous philosophy. Vega accepted this without pressing further, respecting both the significance of his response and his need for space to process the transformation occurring within him. As the sun climbed higher, casting long shadows across the wasteland, they prepared to continue their journey. The path ahead remained dangerous. Reclaimer forces would be hunting them with particular vengeance, and the everyday threats of the wasteland hadn't diminished. Yet something had changed in how the Drifter perceived those dangers. Survival remained his purpose, but its definition had expanded beyond mere biological continuation. Freedom, connection, purpose, these too were essential elements of truly surviving in a broken world. The Drifter adjusted his pack, wincing as the movement pulled at his wounds. West, then, he decided. Vega smiled, a rare, genuine expression in the wasteland. West, she agreed. Together, they descended from the ridge, two figures moving with purpose across a landscape that remained hostile but not hopeless, their shared journey a testament to the resilience of the human spirit in a world with no shelter and no mercy.